My name is Ethan, and this happened last winter when I was staying at my parents' cabin in northern Wisconsin. It wasn't a fancy cabin, just a simple A-frame my dad had built years ago. He used to take me and my sister up there during summers, but ever since I moved to Chicago for work, I hadn't been back much. My parents had asked me to check on the place while they were traveling, so I figured I'd stay a few nights, clear my head, and enjoy some peace and quiet. The cabin was tucked away on a small dirt road, surrounded by dense woods. There weren't any close neighbors, but the nearest town, Mill Creek, was about a 15-minute drive. I got there in the afternoon, right before the first big snowfall of the season. It started out nice. I lit a fire in the old stone fireplace, brewed some coffee, and settled into the worn-out recliner in the living room with a book. By the time the sun set, the snow was coming down hard, and the cabin was cocooned in silence. It was the kind of silence you only get in the woods. No cars, no voices, just the occasional crack of a branch under the weight of snow. Around 8 p.m., I started to feel uneasy. I couldn't explain it. Nothing had happened, but something about the silence felt heavier than usual. I chalked it up to being alone in the woods for the first time in years and told myself to relax. But then I heard it, a soft crunch outside. I froze, listening. It could have been snow falling off a branch, I thought, or maybe a deer. I tried to focus on my book again, but my mind kept wandering back to that sound. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again, closer this time. I set the book down and went to the window by the front door. The porch light cast a faint glow onto the snow, but I didn't see anything. I stood there for a while, staring out into the dark before shaking my head and laughing at myself. "You're being paranoid," I muttered. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I checked the locks on the door and windows, then tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone. At around 10:30, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't loud, just 3 soft taps. I froze. Who the hell would be out here, in the middle of nowhere, during a snowstorm? I stood up slowly, my heart racing, and peeked out the window next to the door. Nothing. Just snow falling in the porch light. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I waited for a few minutes, listening to the wind howl through the trees, then sat back down, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or my imagination. But then, about 15 minutes later, the knock came again. This time it was louder, 3 deliberate knocks, like whoever was on the other side wanted me to know they were there. I grabbed the fireplace poker, my hands trembling, and tiptoed back to the window. Still nothing. I don't know why, but I decided to open the door, just a crack. "Hello?" I said again, louder this time. The cold air rushed in, stinging my face, but the porch was empty. The snow on the ground was pristine. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding. "Get it together, Ethan," I whispered to myself. I went back to the living room, sat by the fire, and tried to calm down. Maybe I was imagining things, or maybe it was the wind, but the feeling in my gut, the one telling me something wasn't right, just kept growing. Around midnight, I decided to go to bed. I figured if I could just sleep, I'd feel better in the morning. But as I climbed the stairs to the loft bedroom, I felt it again, that sense of being watched. I turned around and looked out the large living room window that faced the woods. And that's when I saw him, a man, standing just at the edge of the tree line. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the cabin. I ducked down, my heart hammering in my chest. Did he see me? What was he doing? I peeked over the windowsill again, but he was gone. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the light or my imagination, but I knew what I saw. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me jump, branches scraping against the cabin, the wind rattling the windows. I kept the poker by my side and didn't let myself drift off until the first light of dawn crept through the windows. When I finally worked up the courage to go outside, I found footprints in the snow. They led from the woods to the living room window, right where I'd seen him standing. But here's the thing. They didn't lead back into the woods. They circled the cabin, over and over. I left that morning and didn't look back. It's been a year and I still don't know who or what I saw that night, but I haven't been back to the cabin and I don't think I ever will. I don't know why I didn't turn around that night. Looking back, every instinct in me was screaming to just stop and go back. But I didn't, and that decision has haunted me ever since. My name is James, and this happened just a few weeks ago during one of the worst snowstorms I've ever seen. It was a Friday evening, and I was driving back to my parents' house in northern Michigan. They live about 2 hours from Detroit, tucked away in a small rural town called Asheville. I'd been meaning to visit them for weeks, but work had kept me busy, and I figured the weekend before Christmas would be the perfect time to finally make the trip. The forecast had warned about heavy snow, but I thought I'd beat the storm if I left early enough. Of course, I underestimated just how fast things can change up here. By the time I hit the back roads leading to Asheville, it was pitch black outside, and the snow was coming down so hard my wipers couldn't keep up. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me, and the road, if you could even call it that, was nothing but a slippery, unmarked sheet of white. I was tense, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, when I noticed a small wooden sign ahead. It was partially buried in snow, but I could just make out the words, Cedar Grove Ard. My mom had mentioned taking this road as a shortcut, and in that moment, I thought it would save me some time. That was my first mistake. As soon as I turned onto Cedar Grove, I regretted it. The road was narrow, lined with towering pine trees that blocked out any light from the moon or stars. It felt like driving into a tunnel, the only sound the crunch of snow under my tires. I told myself it was just another quiet country road, but there was something about the way the trees seemed to lean in, like they were watching me. About 15 minutes in, my car's low fuel light came on. I cursed under my breath, realizing I hadn't filled up before leaving. My phone had no signal, no surprise out here, and I hadn't seen another car or house since turning onto Cedar Grove. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the road. At first I thought it was just a shadow or a trick of the headlights, but as I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was wearing a heavy coat and a knit cap, and he was waving at me, trying to flag me down. Every rational part of me told me to keep driving. I mean, who stands out in the middle of nowhere during a snowstorm? But something about the way he waved, it wasn't frantic or desperate. It was calm, deliberate, like he knew I'd stop. And I did. I rolled down my window just enough to talk. "You okay?" I called out, my voice trembling despite myself. The man stepped closer, his face partially obscured by the falling snow. He had a weathered look, like he'd been outside for a long time, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "Car broke down up ahead," he said, his voice steady. "I need a ride to the crossroads." I hesitated. "The crossroads?" "Just a mile or two up the road," he said, motioning with his hand. I didn't like it. Something about him felt wrong, but I also didn't want to leave him out here to freeze. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door. The man climbed in without a word, brushing snow off his coat. He didn't look at me as he settled into the seat, just stared straight ahead. I started driving, the tension in the car thick enough to choke on. "What were you doing out here?" I asked, trying to break the silence. "Got turned around," he said simply. "Where's your car?" "Back there," he said, gesturing vaguely behind us. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but all I saw was snow. The road seemed to stretch on forever, the trees pressing in closer with each passing minute. The man didn't say anything else, and the air in the car felt heavy, like all the warmth had been sucked out. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a clearing up ahead. The road widened slightly, and there was a wooden post with a small sign, "Crossroads." "This is it," the man said. I slowed to a stop, glancing around. There was nothing here, just the intersection of two unmarked roads and an old, rusted street lamp that flickered weakly in the wind. "Are you sure this is where you want to be?" I asked, my voice unsteady. The man turned to look at me for the first time. His eyes were dark, almost black, and his face had a strange, unreadable expression. "This is where I need to be," he said. Before I could respond, he opened the door and stepped out into the snow. He didn't close it behind him, just started walking down the road without looking back. I sat there for a moment, heart racing, before leaning over to shut the door. That's when I noticed something on the seat where he'd been sitting. A single set of keys. They were old, rusty, like they hadn't been used in years. I grabbed them instinctively, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Call out to him? Leave them here. But when I looked back down the road, he was gone. Just gone. I didn't wait around to figure out what was happening. I threw the car into drive and sped off, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I finally got back to the main highway, my phone buzzed back to life. I pulled over to check my messages and noticed something strange. The GPS showed Cedar Grove Road, but it was marked as a dead end. I haven't been able to shake the feeling that the man was leading me somewhere that night, somewhere I wasn't supposed to go. And the keys? I still have them, tucked away in a drawer. I don't know why I kept them, but I can't bring myself to throw them away. I wasn't supposed to be out that night. My boss had asked me to stay late at the office, again, and I had this sinking feeling in my gut when I walked out to the parking lot. It wasn't just the storm rolling in, or the fact that I'd have to drive 2 hours back to the house I was renting in the middle of nowhere. It was something else. My name's Jake Russell. I work for a small construction company in upstate Vermont, and this happened 2 winters ago. I remember every detail of it, every sound, every shadow. The drive started out okay. The first 20 minutes were just flurries, the kind of snow you barely even notice. But by the time I hit the back roads, the storm was in full force. The snow came down so thick I could barely see a few feet ahead, and the wind was throwing it around like confetti. I should have pulled over, I know that now, but I was tired and I just wanted to get home. I was about halfway through my drive when I noticed something strange. There was this car up ahead, a black SUV, parked on the shoulder with its hazards on. Normally, I wouldn't think much of it, but out here, on these back roads, it stood out. I slowed down as I passed, trying to get a better look. The SUV was empty. The driver's side door was open, snow piling up on the seat. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that same stupid need to help people that always gets me in trouble. Either way, I pulled over and stepped out of my truck, the wind almost knocking me off my feet. "Hello," I shouted, my voice barely carrying over the storm. No answer. I walked around to the front of the SUV, my boots crunching in the snow. The headlights were still on, shining down the road. And that's when I saw them. Footprints. They led away from the SUV, disappearing into the woods on the side of the road. I hesitated. This wasn't normal. Whoever had been driving must have been in a hurry, but why would they leave their car like this? And in this weather? I don't know what made me follow those tracks. Maybe I thought someone was hurt. Maybe I was just curious. Either way, I grabbed my flashlight from the truck and started walking. The woods were dark, the kind of dark that makes you feel like you're being swallowed. The trees were creaking in the wind and the snow was up to my knees, but I kept going. The tracks were fresh and they were easy to follow. About 10 minutes in, I started to get this feeling. You know that feeling when you're being watched? Like someone's right behind you, just out of sight? I stopped and turned around, shining my flashlight back the way I came. Nothing. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice shaking. "Is anyone out here?" Still nothing. I kept walking, but now my heart was pounding. The tracks led deeper into the woods, and I started to notice something strange. They weren't walking tracks, they were dragging. Like whoever made them was pulling something heavy behind them. I stopped again, shining my flashlight ahead. That's when I saw it. A figure standing about 20 feet away. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a thick coat and a knit cap. He was facing away from me, standing perfectly still. "Hey!" I shouted. "Are you okay?" He didn't move. I took a step closer, my boots crunching loudly in the snow. "Do you need help?" Still nothing. I don't know why I didn't turn around right then and there. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't. "Sir," I said, taking another step. That's when he turned around. His face. I'll never forget it. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. His lips were cracked and blue, and his skin was pale, almost translucent. But it wasn't just his face. It was the way he was holding something behind his back. I froze. "What are you doing out here?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his chest rising and falling like he was out of breath. Then he took a step toward me. I panicked. I stumbled backward, tripping over a branch and landing hard in the snow. My flashlight flew out of my hand, the beam swinging wildly through the trees. By the time I scrambled to my feet, he was gone. I didn't wait to find out where he went. I ran back to my truck, my breath coming in gasps, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. When I reached the road, the SUV was gone. I swear it was just gone. No tracks, no sign it had ever been there. Just my truck, sitting on the side of the road like nothing had happened. I didn't stop driving until I got home. Even now, I don't know what I saw out there. Maybe it was a drifter. Maybe it was someone who needed help. But something about the way he looked at me, the way he stood there in the snow, I don't think he wanted help. You know how people always say, listen to your gut? I ignored mine that night. Big mistake. It was late December, a few days after Christmas, and I was driving back to Boston after visiting my sister Rachel and her husband Mark in northern Maine. They live way out in the sticks where cell service is spotty at best, and the roads are barely plowed. I wasn't supposed to leave that night. A storm had rolled in earlier, and Mark had practically begged me to wait until morning, but I was stubborn. The snow didn't look that bad when I started packing up, and I thought, it's just a little snow. I'll take it slow, no big deal. I left around dusk thinking I'd beat the worst of it. An hour into the drive, I knew I'd messed up. The snow was coming down so hard I could barely see past my hood. My wipers were useless, just smearing the ice across the windshield. The road, Birchwood Road, I'll never forget it, was completely deserted. No streetlights, no signs, just endless trees and snow. I was gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt, trying to convince myself I'd make it to the highway soon. That's when I saw her, a woman standing on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow or a tree branch swaying in the wind, but as I got closer I saw her clearly, a young woman in a thin gray coat, standing there like she didn't feel the cold. I slowed down and rolled my window down just a crack. "Hey, are you okay?" She didn't move, didn't even look at me. Just stood there, staring straight ahead, her arms wrapped around herself. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but I couldn't just leave her there. "Do you need a ride?" I called out. Still no response. I pulled over, left the engine running, and stepped out into the freezing wind. "Ma'am," I said, louder this time, taking a few steps toward her. That's when she turned, slowly. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her eyes, God, her eyes looked dead, empty. She didn't say a word, just turned and started walking into the woods. Now, any sane person would have gotten back in their car and driven off, but me? No, I followed her. "Hey, wait!" I called, stumbling after her. The snow was up to my knees and the wind was like needles on my face. "You can't just walk off like that, it's not safe." She didn't stop, didn't even look back. I don't know how far I followed her. 5 minutes? 10? It felt like forever. The trees were so thick I could barely see the sky, and the only sound was the crunch of snow under my boots. Then suddenly she was gone. I stopped, shining my phone's flashlight around. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty woods. "Where are you?" That's when I saw it. A cabin. It was small, barely more than a shack, and looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. The windows were broken and the roof was sagging under the weight of the snow. The door was open, just a crack, and I could see faint footprints leading inside. "Hello?" I called again, stepping closer. My voice sounded weak, even to me. No answer. Against every ounce of common sense, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was so cold it felt like it was cutting my lungs. The place was empty. No furniture, no signs of life. Just bare wooden walls and a dirt floor covered in snow that had blown in through the broken windows. But then I saw it. A coat, draped over a wooden chair in the corner. It was the same thin gray coat she'd been wearing. "Ma'am," I said, my voice shaking. I took a step closer, shining my flashlight around the room. "Are you here?" Nothing. I turned back toward the door, my heart racing. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They were coming from the room behind me, slow and deliberate, crunching in the snow. I froze. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. Then I heard a voice. "Why did you follow me?" It was a whisper, barely audible, but it felt like it was right next to my ear. I spun around, my flashlight flickering. There was no one there. That was it. I bolted out of the cabin, tripping over the threshold and landing face first in the snow. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring which direction I was going. When I finally reached the road, my car was gone. I stood there, panting, staring at the empty stretch of road. My car had been parked right there, I was sure of it. I turned in circles, trying to make sense of it, when I saw headlights in the distance. A truck pulled up, and the driver rolled down his window. "You all right, son?" I could barely speak. "My car. It was here, and now it's gone." The driver frowned. "A car? On this road? You're lucky I even came through. Nobody drives Birchwood Road at night." I didn't argue. I climbed into his truck, shivering so hard I couldn't hold the seatbelt buckle. He drove me to the nearest gas station, and I called Rachel to come pick me up. When I told her what happened, she went pale. "Evan," she said quietly, "no one's lived on Birchwood Road for years. They say it's haunted." I didn't respond. I didn't want to believe it. But I haven't driven down Birchwood Road since, and I never will.